TA to let me know that we're live on Facebook. Oh, looks like we are. Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here on the Zoom and also on our Facebook Live tonight. We're really excited to bring you this post-quarantine back to school edition with Amanda Coffman. Whether you've been remote learning with your child or you've been in a hybrid model, many schools are going back. And we know that this is causing a lot of questions, probably some anxiety on a lot of different levels. So we wanted to bring this to you tonight just to give you some tips for re-entering back out into the world and re-entering school again. We are live on Facebook as well as the Zoom. We will be taking questions in the comments. And after Amanda talks to us a little bit with some great ideas that she has, I will be reading the questions either on Facebook or through the Zoom for Amanda. So feel free to put any questions or comments in at any time. And with no further ado, Amanda, if you would like to introduce yourself, we'll get started.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Coffman. I have been involved with the TAA for about 12 years since my son, who is going to be 15 next month, was first diagnosed when he was 3. I have 3 children. 2 of them have Tourette. So I have a high schooler and I have a 6th grader. And I feel like the idea of back to school is always a big deal for our kids. And here we've done it about 1 million times this year. I get really upset anytime I hear politicians talk about how kids are not in school, because if you have someone who is learning at home, you know that they very much are in school currently and that schools are open, and it's a constant change for our kids about what's going on. But a lot of schools are starting to go back in person for the end of the year. So our situation, we have a college student who's been living in our basement for the last year, who is finally going back to campus in May. My son, who is a freshman in high school, was at home at the beginning of the year, did hybrid for a while, and now is fully in person as of last week. And then our daughter, who is in 6th grade, is fully remote for the year. That was the choice that she made. So we will be looking next year at a transition to middle school into a new building without having been in school at all this year. So we have some experience in our house of all of these different things. So I just wanted to share with you some of the insights that I've gained this year in going back after COVID. That is not what I wanted to do. There we go. I can work my controls. So the first thing you start to do when your schools are opening back up is you start to have conversations with your kid about, hey, you're going to be going back to school, and how do you feel about that? And the really important takeaway from that is that you need to help them reflect on their feelings instead of projecting your feelings onto them. So it's really important to deal with your child's feelings openly and with your own feelings quietly. So I learned that my son would be going back to school full time when watching a live stream of a school board meeting that couldn't be held in person because it wasn't safe, that they were making the decision to send all 1,200 kids back to the high school in person. And during this meeting, they were explaining that they wouldn't be able to meet even the 3 foot of space recommendation, but that would be perfectly fine. They were sure that the kids would be fine because, you know, kids don't transmit this. So that's how I learned that he was going back to school. And then the next day received a short email from the district. So I was not happy. And I was very concerned. So, you know, the situation in our house, my husband is fully vaccinated at this point. My older daughter, who is asthmatic, has had her first dose. And I do have my first dose scheduled. So we're less in panic mode than we used to be. But I was still very uncomfortable with it. But I was very careful, knowing that I get to complain about it at home, and he's the one that has to go into it every day. And anxiety is a big thing that he deals with anyway, particularly social anxiety. So I did not complain, on the phone to my friends like I might normally do. I kept that to myself. I complained to my husband very quietly after the kids were in bed. I did thing out on social media. He's almost 15 now. That has a way of getting back to him. Okay, we were very quiet and just sort of asked him, how do you feel about this? What are your concerns about going back? His biggest concern being lunch, of course. And the important thing about helping your child reflect on their feelings is I automatically made the assumption that his concern about lunch was that it was going to be unmasked and they were going to be too close together and he was going to be uncomfortable with that. It turns out his concern with lunch was that they're adding an extra lunch period so that they can have smaller ones. And so he doesn't know that the people he had been eating with on his hybrid days would be still in his same lunch when they went back full time. So his concern was right back to the normal concern of who am I going to eat lunch with? It was not a COVID concern at all. So really listening to your kids, you might find that you're much better prepared to deal with their concerns about going back than you expected to be, because their concerns are much more typical sometimes than we expect them to be. So it's important as we're going back to school that we get back to those routines. So I know that we've been having this, we have to leave the house again. We've not really done that consistently in a year. We've really ourselves stayed very much isolated. And it's not just the idea of leaving the house and, it's the idea of getting up and getting dressed and getting out of the house and making sure you've had breakfast and making sure you have your lunch and making sure that your checklist now includes, do you have a mask and a backup mask? Those kinds of things, just the routine of getting up and getting going. It was kind of nice to have all at-home learners for a little while so that when the alarm clock didn't go off and they didn't wake up till 5 minutes before school started, that meant they just had to, roll up to their desk and could eat breakfast during first hour. That was actually kind of nice. And we've gotten out of that. So we do have to leave the house again. The things that you may have been dealing with that were problems before are going to go away and you're going to have all new problems. So for my younger daughter, she hates to look at herself on the Zoom screen all day long. So that's been a constant struggle with us as the teacher keeps saying, please keep your camera on. And she keeps wanting to hide her own face. So she's going to be happy to get off Zoom when she goes back next year. But I did have to explain to her that she's going to have to wear shoes like all day, every day. And that pretty much did her in, the thought that she has to put shoes on again. Practice these routines. Any teacher will tell you that when you come back to school, the beginning, you need to practice. So you need to go back to maybe like you did when they were in kindergarten or first grade and they hadn't done school before because they haven't done school in a while, and help them to lay out their clothes the night before and make sure that that includes a mask and make sure that they can locate both of their shoes the night before so you're not scrambling around. Thinking about the things that you now have to take to school with you that that haven't been a routine to pack in a backpack. Those types of things, making sure that you have everything together so that the morning goes more smoothly. Practicing those routines is really important. And if you've already been back for a couple of weeks and things are already terrible, teachers will also tell you it's not too late to go back and start practicing those routines. Get yourself ready on Sunday night. Even do a dry run on a day that you don't have school, on a Saturday. Can you wake up to your alarm and get yourself dressed and brush your teeth and get down in time for breakfast? How long does that take you to be able to do since you become so accustomed to just hitting snooze? Practice those routines. And then stay positive and focus on the success. So when my kids were really little and I had to get all three of them to school and daycare before I got myself to work, our mornings were a little bit frantic, but I would make sure to stop and take a deep breath once we were all buckled in the car and say, thanks, guys. We got out of the house on time, even when we didn't. Okay. Because I wanted to be able to completely reset for them that frantic feeling that I was having before I had to drop them off. So whether you're dropping your kid off at school, or they're walking or riding their bike, or they're taking the bus, make sure that that last interaction you have with them before they leave is a very positive one. Even if it's by text message, because maybe you're not there, maybe you're already at work, just send that positive text to say, really proud of you for getting out of the house on time. Then if they're not out of the house on time yet, when they receive that text, that gives them kind of the kick to get going. But we need to stay positive and keep the focus positively on how well we're doing this, because there are going to be so many negative things coming in that we really need to focus on those positives and the successes. So what we've learned from COVID and our quarantine years, that we have to expect the unexpected, and everybody wants to just get back to normal, and school is not normal right now. The assigned seats that they have, that they don't get to move, and they don't get to work in groups, and they can't leave the classroom as freely, even to, go get a drink or take a break to release ticks, or things that we may have set up for them in the past, now might be difficult things to do with the COVID restrictions that are still in place in schools. So we have to be able to help them to expect the unexpected and to be able to just kind of roll with it. So one of the things that you might need to do, which seems strange to be doing in April, is to create the lines of communication that you've always had before. So if your school situation was like ours was in remote, I had very little contact with teachers. I didn't actually even have any parent-teacher conferences. I hadn't, my son was changing a school. I hadn't reached out to even the school nurse to talk about his Tourette and how that might affect him, because he wasn't there. He wasn't in school. And when he went back hybrid, and he was only there 2 days a week, and there were only half the kids, it didn't seem like that big of a deal to me. And so I didn't create those lines of communication then. And I panicked a little bit when I realized he was going to have to go back full time, and I really needed to know what was going on. So I reached out to the school nurse the night before they started back full time to say, hey, you'll see it in his file, but my son has Tourette syndrome. One of the tics that he's had since he was in preschool is a cough. And I just, would like people to be aware that he will frequently cough, and that is just a tic for him and not an issue. Also, people can feel free to ask him, and he will tell you it's a tic. He feels very comfortable talking about his Tourette, especially if your child is not a good advocate for themselves in the school at this point. You don't want to just kind of leave them hanging out there. You want to create those lines of communication that you would normally have. So with the classroom teacher, or if they're in secondary, pick, the teachers that seem to be the most important to reach out to. If there's a school nurse, if your child has a school counselor, now is the time to start making those relationships and reaching out to those people and creating those lines of communication, so that you're just kind of, popping your head up with, hey, this is some information that you haven't needed to know up to this point, but that you do need to know right now. And I just want you to be aware of these things, because I'm going to be reaching out as we encounter problems. And then just be ready to change course. If your kid comes home and says, I can't just go get a drink whenever I want to, like I used to, what are we going to do? Now is time to have that problem-solving conversation. Do you feel the need to get out of the classroom? Or is there something you can do at your desk? Can you do, some progressive relaxation exercises, or some breathing that you do right at your desk that nobody even has to be aware of? whatever's going to work for your child. And you have those lines of communication that you started with the teacher and some other support people to be able to help you. So for example, my son, for the first time in 3 years, started having panic attacks every morning, getting ready to go to school. We've been back, a whole week, but he did not experience this in hybrid. And suddenly we're back in school full time and he isn't able to eat breakfast and he's shaky. And I can see that this is, going to come down to some school refusal pretty quick if we don't nip this in the bud. Not to mention that I just felt bad kind of, kicking him to the curb in the morning out of the car with, I could see her in the middle of a major panic attack. Have a great day. So he and I talked about, what did it feel like internally? He has strategies. He's dealt with this before, though not in several years. And he said, it's mostly first hour. Well, they are on a block schedule. So Mondays and Wednesdays, he has a different first hour than he does on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so, of course, those are his biggest heavy hitter classes. It's either math or science. So I reached out to just the math and science teachers. And I said, this is what's going on. This is what he's going to try. This is what we're doing at home. We're looking at a possible medication switch. This is a big issue for him. I don't want it to be a bigger issue. This is what I'd like. Galen would like to sit near the door somewhere so that he can, without warning, just get up and go into the hallway. He feels like a few minutes in the hallway right outside the door will give him time to get it back together and be able to come in and rejoin class. And we have an agreement that if it doesn't work within a couple of minutes, he'll go to the nurse's office. Okay? Teachers are always worried about accountability. Where's the kid going to be? How do I know he's doing what he's really supposed to be doing? Currently, they're worried about students wandering the classroom. So he'd like to sit near the door so that he's not disrupting other people. He'd like to stand right outside that door. And if it doesn't work and he's not back in your class in 5 minutes, he'll be in the nurse's office. I heard back, and then I ended it with, if you see any reason why this wouldn't work in your classroom, please let me know. And I heard back from both of them saying, a lot of kids are under stress right now. They haven't seen any signs of this from Galen, which doesn't surprise me. I knew that, but they were both willing to give it a shot. And honestly, knowing that accommodation was in place, he's never actually used it, which I find with a lot of the accommodations for our kids. But, just being ready to say, oh, panic attacks, we weren't expecting that. Let's try something different that we're going to do here. Be ready for things to crop up that maybe you haven't dealt with before. And then most importantly, remember what works. Your kid was going to school every day a year ago, and it felt so normal. And now it's the abnormal to think about sending them back. But you did so much work to make school work before. So don't forget about those things that worked. You may not have needed them in the last year. For example, my younger daughter used to have, and I let it lapse, a 504. But in her 504 was things like separate place for testing and extended time on math. And she's at home. Like, we even joked about it at the beginning of the year. I said, I'm not going to ask for a separate location for testing. I'm not going to make you get up from your desk and go to the dining room table or something. Like, you're fine. You don't need that right now. And her teacher currently doesn't use any timed tests. Like, they're all on the computer and the kids have an unlimited amount of time to do them. So the two major things that were in her 504 were not necessary. And so we let her 504 lapse. Now, when she goes back to school next year, we're going to have to make sure that that's in place again, especially because she's changing buildings. So this is where, knowing what worked in the past, it's okay to start asking for that stuff. It's okay to be the one who suddenly in April is like, oh, wait a second, we need this. And I need you to recognize me and to know something about my child, when we're not used to doing that at this time in the year. Usually we're hoping things are going pretty well right now. So it's okay to be that beginning of the school year parent because it is the beginning of the school year. And you are really the only one who knows your kid well as a learner at this point. Because if the teachers have been seeing them remotely or even in hybrid and everything is different, you're the one who knows your child as a learner best right now. And to be able to say, these are the things that really worked last year, or, these are the things I've noticed have worked at home. Those things are going to be important. Part of that, back to creating your communication, is knowing who you reach out to at this point in the year. So if your child has an IEP, they will have a case manager, and you probably already know that person and can be in communication with that person. If they don't have an IEP, if they do have a 504, the person in an elementary school who is responsible for that is probably the principal. In a secondary school, it's probably an assistant principal or a counselor. So you want to find out who. Okay. And so the best way to do that, there are two ways. You can stalk the website, school's website, and try to figure it out. You can ask friends who have older kids who've gone through that school, or just reach out to anybody who you feel comfortable reaching out to. So if, for example, my son is in choir, that's something he's going to do for 4 years. I know the choir director real well. He's the person that I would ask about, who should I ask about a 504? Because he works in the school, he knows. Okay, so figure out who that is so that you can reach out to that person. And if your kids are staying at home right now and aren't going back until next year, okay, these are still the kinds of things you're still going to be sort of starting over with the school next year, whether it's the same school or a new school. So, begin sort of taking your notes of things that have worked. For example, online learning has worked really well for my daughter, and her going back to a school where she can't control all of her own time is going to be an adjustment for her. So, just so that I am aware of that, and will probably make her counselor aware of that since she'll be in middle school next year. The other idea of just knowing what works and, kind of putting that in place right now is you do want to get some of that stuff in writing, but you also want to be as flexible as you can working with the school, keeping in mind that we're almost at the end of the school year here. The one thing that you may want to insist on, if your kids are not back full-time already, is any kind of transition that they would normally have that they're not getting in COVID. So for example, there's no move up day for middle school this year. So, nobody's getting that move up day, but that doesn't matter to me. I will still insist that she get a tour of the school and a chance to meet at least a few of her teachers before school starts next year. I'm not just going to sit back and say, oh, well, everybody's in the same place. Nobody got move up day. She is in a different situation. And so I'm going to insist upon that. So it's never too late to start preparing, whether you're already back or you're not back. Just keep that focus on the positive, be ready to sort of roll with whatever issues your kids come up, and start really creating those good communication lines that normally you would already have in place. Okay, Wendy, questions?
Yes. Thanks, Amanda. I do have a few questions, and anyone else, please put them in the chat, either on the Zoom or on the Facebook, and we will answer them. The first question I have is, do you have any recommendations for my son who is worried about sitting in the same seat all day with his mask on? How can I let his teachers know he will need breaks before we'll go back in a week?
Yeah, and I think that is exactly, the issue you sort of introduce yourself with. So we're headed back, let them know what you've done, what works at home. At home, this is how he does school. Is he standing up? Is he moving around? What is he able to do? This are the times that he's had to be masked, and this is how we're practicing masks. This is our our concern and see what kind of problem solving you can get out of it. You're likely to get sort of brushed off with, well, there are a lot of kids that this is going to be a problem for, or this is an adjustment for everybody. But you just need to kind of come back with, but it's a greater adjustment for my child. So what are some things that we can put in place? It sounds like, you know, if it's secondary school, maybe he leaves class 2 minutes before everybody else when they change classes, so that he can take his mask off in the hallway because he's the only one there, and have a little bit of extra stretch time. And then he puts it back on when the bell rings and everybody else comes out. You know, maybe he just needs to sit in the back of the classroom so that he can stand up and even move around a little bit if that's the problem. So, you know, just come with a couple of suggestions and just kind of keep pushing that. Okay, but what are we going to have in place the first day? Let's not wait for it to fail.
Thanks, Amanda. Here's another one. My school just decided to go back 5 days a week in 2 weeks. Can I request an IEP meeting before we go back?
Yes, absolutely. You can request an IEP meeting at any time. They have to respond to your request within 10 days. That doesn't mean they have to set up the meeting before you go back, but my guess is they're going to want to. They want things to be in place and for the kids to be as successful as possible as well. Your special ed teacher's probably a little overwhelmed right now with a lot of people making that particular request, but yes, get your request in as quickly as possible. And it's always good, I think, when you're requesting, you know, any kind of formal meeting, to give them some idea of why. You know, I'm requesting that we meet about Fred's IEP before he starts back in school full time. Here are my top 3 concerns. That way they're just, you know, more ready to deal with that.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Here's another one. Thanks for organizing this helpful seminar. My son will likely be staying remote through the rest of the school year, but will be in person when he starts a new middle school in as a 6th grader. How do you recommend we prepare both my son and his new school, teachers and classmates, etc.? We don't want to make a big deal about it, but also realize that kids can often be unkind when they aren't educated about tics and Tourette. It's a difficult transition to middle school during regular times, let alone post-quarantine time.
Mm-hmm. And it's especially hard because we don't know what school's going to look like next year. You know, we don't know when kids are going to be able to get vaccinated. We don't know if masks will still be in place, if some of the social distancing things that schools are doing will still be in place. So it's a tough question. I would say, as far as preparing you and your son, I am doing just a wonderful presentation at the TAA National Conference in May, which is free to register for, all about middle school transitions, both for kids and parents. So I would recommend you register and attend that. Also, basic recommendations that I have for middle school. Number one, like, ask for that tour, that individual tour the week before school starts, so that he can walk his schedule, know where all the classes are, practice with his locker. Even when they tell you all the kids are going to do that the first day of school, that's great. You still want it the week before school starts, just to help him get a little bit of comfort level with that transition to middle school. I also recommend that middle school and higher, because you don't have just one teacher, you have multiple teachers, that your child writes an email once they get their class schedule, which may only be a couple of days before school, but they can start working on that email this summer, what it will sound like. Just introducing themselves, saying, I have Tourette. This is what it looks like for me. These are the tics that you might notice, or, you know, my biggest issue is my ADHD. You know, these are the things that I do to control it. This is what works for me. I'm looking forward to a great year, including, I'm comfortable talking about it. Feel free to ask questions, or I would prefer not to talk about it in school. You know, here's my mom's email. Wherever your child is, it really is helpful for the teachers to have that initial contact about it come from your child, and then know how to follow up. Also, you're reaching out to the counselor in the school, in the middle school, and saying, we're worried about this transition. What do you do for kids transitioning in this situation, because it's unlikely that they've never had another child with Tourette. So they've at least got some idea of how they might want to approach it.
Okay, Amanda, another question here. Any recommendations for the bus? My child doesn't like the bus anyway, and I'm worried that he'll struggle after not having rode the bus at all this year and going back this month.
Yeah. Oh, the bus, man. If I could invent one thing, it would be teleporters that just went from homes to schools so that nobody ever had to ride the bus. On a positive note, though, some of the things that are most difficult for our kids on the bus are things like not knowing where they're going to sit when they get on, or, other kids that they don't want to have to be by, or all of, that kind of thing. And there will be assigned seats on buses, and there will be masking on buses for the remainder of this year anyway. I would reach out to, whether it's, the transportation person through your school or the bus company, if it is a separate bus company. And I would just ask for things like, can he be assigned a seat near the front by himself? Be real honest with him about like exactly how long the bus ride is expected to take, and really minimize that, even if it seems long, even if it's like, look, it's a half an hour out of your life. You're going to sit in the seat by yourself. You'll wear a mask. Nobody will talk to you. It'll be perfectly fine. What are you going to do? Take a toy with you that you're going to play with, or if they're old enough, that they've got a phone, like what game are you going to play on your phone? Like, what are you going to do to entertain yourself? I actually think the bus situation might be, because it'll be a more controlled environment, will be better. And don't be afraid to do the countdown at this point. We already are. Here we are back full time, but we've only got 6 weeks of it left. And then we're done, because here in Kansas, we're out the end of May. So, just kind of keeping that positive, look at all the bus rides you got out of, instead of look at how horrible this bus is going to be.
Thanks, Amanda. That was great. I don't have any more questions right now. If anyone else wants to put any questions in the chat on the Zoom or the Facebook Live, please feel free to do so. I did put some resources in the comments, as well as a survey. I see Amanda put up a QR code. If you just turn your camera on and hold it over this QR code, you will go right to the survey. The TA works together with the CDC in partnership to fund programs like this that we're bringing to you tonight. So we appreciate. There's also a link in the comment section to click right on and to do the survey. I know Amanda mentioned our national conference. Anyone who is transitioning to middle school or going to middle school in a few years, or has a child in middle school, she will have some great tips, not just for families, but excuse me, she's also doing a session for kids, just for kids on middle school as well. Our national conference is actually free. It's virtual and free this year. So please join us May 14th through 16th. Speaking of national conference, I thought I had to bring that up. There's so many great sessions for kids, adults, educators, parents, and clinicians. So we'd really like to thank you so much for participating tonight. And we hope that the information presented was really helpful to you. We have another minute, so if anyone does have any questions, we will answer them yet. But if we could ask you to, again, please complete the survey. I did get a comment to resend the survey again. I thought I put it here in the chat, but I will do that again. If everyone can just stay on, I'll resend that. And any other questions, please feel free to bring them up. And Amanda, we just want to say thank you so much. This was super fantastic. And my son is 13 and will be going back full time after being in a hybrid model, I think on April 19th. So this is very timely for me as well. It doesn't matter how much you think about this. If If it's your kid, it's harder and it's nicer to listen to Amanda easier than it is to just try to take care of things myself. So I really appreciated this as well. It was really great advice. And I just put the survey back in the chat again. If the survey says www.surveymonkey.com, if you could click on that to fill that out if you're participating on Zoom or Facebook. Any other questions? We'll give it just another minute. And I think we're good.
All right.
All right, Amanda, thank you so very much for tonight. It was perfect. We appreciate you.